blessings on us. We pray that you will bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, here's my grid that I use. I talk about it every week. Acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding. And that's based on the fact that as we get closer to the end, we're going to see all of these things happening. We're going to see acceleration. Things are going to be happening more quickly. And I think that almost everybody that watches this area agrees that things seem to be happening quite quickly. It used to be that when I was preparing Prophecy Updates 25 years ago, I would have a couple, 3 stories to talk about that I thought were prophetically relevant, and now it's just like everything under the sun. And sometimes there's a thing that happens like the tyranny of the urgent, that you get sort of brought into this vortex that everything is important. And I don't really want to do that, but it's different. It feels different. And I think everybody that I talk to says that it feels different. So the understanding part, as we get closer, I think we'll understand how some of these things work out. And if I get to it today, I might share a little bit from Daniel chapter 7, because I think there's some things there that are worth watching with what's going on in the world. But Daniel chapter 12, and this follows up some similar verses in Daniel chapter 11 that say the same thing. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And in Daniel chapter 11, it says the wise will understand and instruct many. So we're coming up on this period of the birth pangs. I have a friend that I discuss these things with by text and messenger, sometimes on phone calls. And he's a big advocate that we should have some kind of metrics to measure when these things are going to happen. How do you measure that the white horse is ridden, the seal has been broken and the white horse ridden, the seal has been broken and the red horse, and so on and so forth. And then if we, and I know people don't think, well, there's a lot of controversy, will we be here for the trumpet and the bowl judgments? The answer is, I would prefer not to be here for any of this stuff. But I think we need to be humble enough in our views on timing of certain events that we may see a lot more than we thought. And how are we going to deal with that? For example, I see people posting every week, well, this is happening and it looks like the Antichrist is ready to burst on the scene, but we won't be here for any of that. Well, maybe you will be. None of us want to be, and you may die beforehand. I mean, I had my 70th birthday last week, so I understand that time is short. The only advantage to being 70 is that I'm closer to shooting my age in golf, assuming that I can still get around on the golf ball as I get older. So that it's kind of a race that I'm in, and hopefully that will happen more often. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about politics, about one thing that I see concerning me from Canada, and then we'll talk about the Middle East and Russia, Ukraine, and some pretty stunning things that are happening in that particular space. So here's I talk about demographics a lot. Later I will share with you a speech by Vladimir Putin from Russia, his State of the Nation address. I think they're having elections in a couple weeks. Everybody's having elections this year, it seems like. It's like about 50% of the world's population will be having major national elections. And in an era where disinformation and misinformation are rising quickly, that's going to be a problem. But I've been talking about demographics for a long time, and these came from The Times of London, South Korea is facing an extinction after birth rate falls sharply again. And they had an editorial called Soul Destroying. South Korea's plummeting birth rate threatens its survival. It's a big problem. I mean, you can see from the chart there on the right, their birth rate is down dramatically. But the world's is going down too. But South Korea has fallen to 0.72. Replacement is 2.1. In other words, the average woman needs to have 2.1 children to keep the population level. Above 2.1, the population will grow. Below 2.1, it drops off. It drops off very quickly. And so you see a lot of countries, South Korea is maybe the worst in the world, but a lot of countries are down in the ones. I saw something recently from Russia. I think it was, well, there's a worldometer website where you can go and you can check birth rates. But Russia's has been down around 1.2, 1.3. Now we have a major problem, demographic problem in Ukraine because of the death of so many young men. They're on their curve, population curve, they have the worst in the world in ages 20 to 40 for males. And despite what some people want to say, you still need males to produce. Well, but people are trying to change that, and I know they would like to change that. By the way, while I'm thinking of it, I did do a lot of extra work this week. I'm quite tired. If I struggle with my words more than usual today, please be understanding. I did about a 2-hour interview with Pablo Fraschini of Serpents and Doves of our friend Patrick Wood, who's been here at church. Need to try to get him to come back here soon. We're going to try to do that. Talking about technocracy and transhumanism. Then the next day I think that was on Thursday. Then on Friday, the next morning I got up at 1:45 a.m. to interview Jonathan Spire because Israel insists on being on a different time than we are. You know, like they want to be daylight when they're at work and going to work. So self-centered. The whole Middle East is that way though. But I was going to do him at 10 a.m. Israel time, so that's 3 a.m. Ohio time, and I had to do all the prep things and title slides and that sort of thing. So you can find those on the website, and I hesitate to put up Jonathan Spire, who I interviewed, who is maybe the most articulate person that I've ever talked to in my life. This guy can go with a phrase, no pauses, no anything. So it's a complete contrast to me, I guess, who kind of sometimes struggles with what I want to say. But he was phenomenal. His knowledge of the Middle East, he's probably one of the world's leading military and war correspondents. And so I would highly recommend that you watch that hour. I had Simon Barrett from the Middle East Report in the UK help me out just in case I fell asleep. But it was very interesting, and 5 Hour Energy helped a little bit as well. So we have elections. So this is what's going on in the United States, and everybody's on the left is just freaking out. This is the New York Times today. Warning lights flashing for president's campaign. New York Times poll finds showing that right now among likely voters, Trump is at 48%, Biden at 43%, and about 10% undecided. Now, I know those don't quite add up to 100%, but it's the New York Times, folks, you know. But I also saw some other polls from people who have seemed to be more accurate that have Trump up by 10 points. And this is despite every effort to get Trump out of the race. So Trump has appealed from one of his cases to the U.S. Supreme Court. He has claimed that he's entitled to presidential immunity. It's not something that's ever had to be decided before, because we've never had one party decide to prosecute the prior president, especially when the prior president is also going to be the likely nominee for the upcoming election. So the justice system has been weaponized against people. So the Supreme Court has agreed to hear his immunity claims. A lot of people said there's no way. You saw all the usual left-wing lawyers, Andrew Weissman and those guys on MSNBC. Oh, there's no way the court will ever hear this case. Well, the court is hearing this case. That's probably going to delay his trial on the documents they claim that he kept improperly at his estate, where he had Secret Service protection and other people around, as opposed to President Biden, who kept documents from his time as vice president in his garage behind, I don't know, one of his cars, his Corvette or something. But he's not being prosecuted for that because he's not, at least the special prosecutor said he's not competent to stand trial. But he's competent to be president, which seems to be a little bit of an oxymoron. In the terms of this energy thing, we've talked a lot about that. I would highly recommend that you follow a guy named Dave Walsh Energy on Getter. We have a problem. They are trying to shift everything to solar and wind. And that's fine, but solar and wind don't work except about, maybe at best, 30% of the day. That's a problem because you need continuous on power. So at night, that's when people really want to use, the lights in the house. Well, if you're totally dependent on solar and wind, you're not going to have power at that time of day. It just doesn't generate enough. And these wind farms, I've been seeing them. Some of them are aging now. They're having to tear them down. And it's these massive chunks of metal that have to be put into landfills. This is an article from the Times of London. It said one of the problems with electric cars, perhaps the least expected, was the revelation that some home charging points provide a potential point of weakness for malign foreign powers to interfere with our national grid. Last week, this is in the UK, the Office for Product Safety and Standards ordered the company Wallbox to stop selling its copper SB chargers because hackers could potentially access the chargers and incapacitate the grid by such means as suddenly turning on thousands of chargers full pell at the same time. In other words, that means they turn them all on at the same time at maximum charging loads. But do we really need a foreign power to crash our electricity grid when we are quite capable of inflicting it on ourselves? We are heading for a big electricity crunch as it is. Whoever wins the general election, the next government will be committed to decarbonizing the national grid by 2035 in the case of the Conservatives and by 2030 in the case of Labor. That means either closing all the gas power stations or fitting them with carbon capture and storage technology, which does not yet exist on scale in Britain and whose costs are likely to be massive. That could leave us trying to power the country pretty much with intermittent wind and solar energy alone. And this at a time when politicians want millions more of us to be driving electric cars and heating our homes with heat pumps, thus substantially increasing demand. So the government's going to be pushing for decarbonization. You've heard this. We've been talking about this for years now, that they want everybody to have an electric car. Now what's happening? People are losing their jobs in the auto industry. Why? Because they're not selling enough electric cars. Ford was losing more per car than they were able to sell the car for. That's after selling the car for that amount. They lost that amount of money plus a little bit on each car they sold. That's insanity. Now, I will say this, I've owned Toyotas for years. Toyota's working on solid state batteries, and if they're successful in getting this to where it could be manufactured, it will radically change the battery market for vehicles. But Toyota seems to be more committed towards hybrid vehicles. I own a hybrid vehicle, and I love pulling into the gas station and getting confirmed that I got 58 miles per gallon in the last go round. And by the way, if you ever pull, I have a Prius, if you ever pull into a gas station, don't get behind the SUVs. You're going to be there for a long time because it's got that big tank. Get behind the hybrid, because we only have like a 9.8 gallon tank. And you're pretty much, boom, you're in and out of there like a quick pit stop in the race. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is Canada. There's a few things that have been very concerning this week. There was an independent journalist who was present in the Capitol on J6 in the United States. He reported on things. There are pictures and videos of him taking notes, talking to people. He walked in through the door, unlike a New York Times reporter, by the way, who climbed in through a broken window. This reporter now works for Blaze Media, that's Glenn Beck's group. He was arrested this week on 4 misdemeanor charges and was taken to federal court and had to appear in federal court in an orange jumpsuit, leg irons, and shackles. This is called the infamous perp walk. They do this on purpose. I've had clients that have been caught up in federal investigations and been indicted and that type of thing. And part of this is done to intimidate people. And so they want everybody to see that this journalist who now works for Glenn Beck's group has been arrested. The videos that they've analyzed show that he didn't really do anything wrong if he was a journalist. And they're saying, well, he wasn't the right kind of journalist because he was kind of joking at one point. He took a picture of Nancy Pelosi's desk and said, boy, it would have been great to get her laptop out, but there was some juicy stuff on there. And they're like, well, he wasn't a journalist, he was an advocate. This is the kind of nonsense that we're putting up with. But understand that this control on speech is coming in spades. So here's a new bill in Canada, C-63, an act to enact the Online Harms Act to amend the criminal code, the Canadian Human Rights Act, and an act respecting the mandatory reporting of internet child pornography by persons who provide an internet service, and to make consequential and related amendments to other acts. Now, the way they're selling this is to prevent child pornography online. That's a smokescreen. They already have laws to prohibit that in Canada. They're trying to go after all kinds of speech that Justin Trudeau and his little World Economic Forum trained minions don't want people to hear. And so they've couched it in terms of the Online Harms Act. So there was a great couple of editorials. I want to talk about the chilling liberal digital bureaucracy. They're trying to control speech. They don't like free speech. So this hate speech is now akin to murder. They say, look at what some of these things say. Now, by the way, there was a recent survey, I might have it in here somewhere. There was a recent survey in the US that found that 1/3 of the public in the survey were not really in favor of free speech and what it says in the First Amendment. Now, I can say when I was in graduate school, almost 50 years ago, my research program and my master's program was I redid a survey that someone had done, to find out the attitudes of people I was in a criminology program, so the people in the program worked in law enforcement, they worked in the correctional administration, they worked in corrections, and they were people studying to go into police work and FBI and DEA. What I did was I took different provisions of the Bill of Rights and I reworded them and said, how do you feel about this? Favor, disfavor? I think it was a 5-point scale. And I found that on things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of association, among the people going into law enforcement, there was less than 50% support for each one of those guarantees of the Constitution. Now, somebody would say, well, you didn't word it right. They would have known if you just give them the First Amendment. Or people going into law enforcement aren't that intelligent, therefore they're not going to answer things correctly. But anyway, so look at some of the things that they talk about in this new Canadian law. Now, it's not passed yet, but Trudeau, what he did was he entered into a coalition agreement. It's a parliament. He doesn't have a majority in his party to govern, to get the majority to be declared prime minister. So like in Israel and other parliamentarian-based governments, they enter into these coalition agreements. And the people that are giving them the votes to get them over the 50% mark, they get a lot of benefits from this. So he entered into a coalition agreement with the NDP, a pretty left-wing party as I understand it. And they probably have the votes to get this passed through the parliament. If it gets passed through the parliament, it will become law in Canada, and it has pretty onerous provisions in it. And it's one that it really scares me that this is what people are doing. I mean, I love Canada. I've been there, but it's one of these things where you wonder how much longer you're going to be able to go there if you don't live there. So here's one. They want to replace a section of one of the acts. Every person who advocates or promotes genocide is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for life. Now, there are serial killers in Canada who do not get life in prison. But now for saying something online, for advocating genocide, you can go to prison for life. Now, we don't want people advocating for genocide. I agree with that. But understand that the definition of genocide is anything but clear these days. You see the claim made against Israel every day, thousands of times a day, that Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. One of the things that's interesting is you don't see a lot of reporting of the death tolls lately because they're not going up that much. Israel has probably done as good a job as you could expect in a densely populated area, and the ratio of military terrorists killed to civilians is probably the best ratio of any army in history. There's been a British historian who said that in the House of Lords recently. So the accusation is Israel's committing genocide. Now, when Israel took over Gaza from Egypt, there were, I think, about 1 million people. When the war started, there were 2.2 million. The claim has always been against Israel, you're committing genocide. If the enemy that you're committing genocide against grows from 1 million to 2 million in a less than 20-year period, you're not very good at it. You're probably the most incompetent genociders ever. And by the way, I will get, we still wrestle with whether we should allow comments on YouTube. We're still allowing it, but it is amazing to me the viciousness that comes our way. And there were some things said against Jonathan Spire. I deleted the comments and blocked the person. They were just outrageous. But I get them every week because I'm in favor of Israel. I don't think Israel is perfect. I think they make mistakes. But I believe that Jews have a right to live in that land. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Look at some of these other provisions of the act. The maximum penalty for a violation is not more than 6% of the gross global revenue of the person that is believed to have committed the violation, or $10 million, whichever is greater. So what they do is the tech companies, they have like 24 hours to take down a post that is believed to violate the act. If they don't do that, they're subject to a fine for that incident of 6% of their annual global revenue worldwide. Now, I don't know how such a law would pass constitutional muster. This is what the editorial, the hate speech now akin to murder. When I was a kid, we used to say that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Nowadays, offensive speech is considered violence. Silence is violence, and those whose words are deemed by the state to be the most egregious will be treated like serial killers. All of us expect to be safe in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities, said Justice Minister Arv Virani after tabling, that means introducing Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, in the House of Commons on Monday. We should be able to expect the same kind of safety in our online communities. To accomplish this, the liberals propose burdening social media platforms with heavy-handed regulations, creating a giant censorship bureaucracy to force compliance, and re-empowering kangaroo courts to persecute people for thought crimes. Bill C-63 establishes a new Digital Safety Commission, Digital Safety Ombudsman, person who handles the complaints, a Digital Safety Office to assist the commission, which will be responsible for ensuring revenge porn and child pornography are taken offline within 24 hours. And there's really enough to think that that's already happening. But look at some of these other things. Rebel News has done a great job in analyzing this bill. Here's one of the other provisions that's very concerning: non-disclosure of identity. The commission may deal with a complaint in relation to a discriminatory practice in Section 13 without disclosing to the person against whom the complaint was filed, or to any other person, the identity of the alleged victim, the individual or group of individuals that has filed the complaint, or any individual who has given evidence or assisted the commission in any way to dealing with the complaint. If the commission considers that there is a real and substantial risk that any of those individuals will be subject to threats, intimidation, or discrimination. Now, what do you think this commission is going to do in such a case? Do you think that they're going to find, oh, there's no harm here? They're going to find harm in every case. And you can have these charges brought against you, subject you to these huge fines, and there are other provisions where you'll have to pay, I forget the number, $7,000 or $10,000 to the person that you've offended. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you said against that person. It's just that they feel offended. And you're going to go bankrupt if you're participating online. And so what they want to do is shut down social media platforms, especially ones that go against the regime that's in power. There's a lot of support for this on one side of the aisle in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. This is bothersome. this is against. Look at this one. A person may, with the Attorney General's consent, lay in information before a provincial court judge if the person fears on reasonable grounds that another person will commit an offense. And you understand that? That it's a thought crime. We think you might do this, so we can come in and you can get an injunction against the person, plus get the $7,000 or $10,000. And you may not know who is charging you. This is Canada. This is a federal law proposed in Canada. So now I'm going to really offend everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ukraine, because I think it might have prophetic significance. In fact, to set this up, there is a controversy within the prophecy community. Is Russia one of the main players in Bible prophecy? A lot of people look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog, Magog, Meshach. Meshach must be Moscow. Rosh must be Russia. Magog is the area of Russia. And it's an interpretive problem that we have. For example, when you see the term Magog, that may have had a very specific meaning in terms of geographic location or people group or both to the prophet Ezekiel. So you just said Magog or Meshach or Tubal or Togarmah. We live about 2,500 years after Ezekiel. And it may be that the people who populated that area, when Ezekiel wrote, have intermarried, immigrated, and don't really exist in that location like they did. So the question then becomes, are we focusing on the geographic location and the people there today, or are we trying to trace ethnicity down through multiple hundreds of generations to figure out where these people ended up when they've intermarried with other people from all over the world? My conclusion is that probably the best way to interpret these is to look at what was the geographic location at the time that these things were written. So in Daniel chapter 7, I don't have these on the slide this week, so if you would like to turn to Daniel chapter 7. I'll just read the first 8 verses. Because this may be a reference to Russia that is contained within these verses. Then the question becomes, so is Russia in the process of doing this, or are they close to doing this? And this is always a problem when we have these prophecies that are about to be fulfilled, because I think we have to be careful. I've said this many, many times. There are too many people who run around and want to say this is that which was prophesied. Sometimes we don't know these things until after the fact. So I get emails every day from people who have an opinion on Babylon. A popular opinion is that America is Babylon and America is going to be destroyed very soon. And we should flee Babylon, because it says, flee Babylon. Now, as I read Revelation 17:18, I think the destruction of this commercial Babylon, and listen, you can make the case that it's the United States. We have been the world power economically for a long time. But the destruction comes in 1 hour, but it appears that it's near the time of the second coming of Jesus. So that's a timing issue, I think, to be running around saying this is going to be fulfilled next week or next month or this fall or after the eclipse that we have here in, 5 weeks, 6 weeks? I don't know that we'll know until after. So there's a there's a lot, man, oh man, you would not believe my email, that the April 8th total eclipse, and it will be a total eclipse from relative to the church here on the other side of Interstate 71. Our house, we live just on the other side of Interstate 71 from the church. Delaware, Lima, Dayton, Toledo, Cleveland, Buffalo, all lie in the path of totality. And they're saying there's millions of people. I've been told by people they try to get a hotel in Cleveland, they can't get a hotel. And the totality lasts anywhere from, like, I think at our house, because we're right on the edge of totality, it's like 2 minutes and 40 seconds of totality. So I spent $21 on eclipse viewing glasses for Pam and I for 2 minutes, and they're probably, I doubt that I'll be able to use them to play golf or anything. So they're like a single use thing. And then the risk is, you may not have noticed this, but it has a tendency to be cloudy in Ohio. So the question I've asked is along the lines of, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there, does it really make a sound? Nobody's there to hear it. If an eclipse happens in Ohio on a sunny day or on a cloudy day and nobody can see it, does it really have any prophetic significance at all? And when I was first looking at this, the advanced forecast, it was cloudy the whole path of the eclipse from Arkansas all the way to Nova Scotia. Total cloud cover. Then it was supposed to be clear blue skies. Now they're kind of going partly cloudy. And the answer is, it's Ohio. We won't know until it actually happens. But the question is it significant? And I've had people ask me, don't you think it's significant? Because people have gotten the maps out. And supposedly there's only one place in the world that has a township or village or city named Rapture. And it happens to be in the path of totality. And as the path of totality moves after rapture, there are 7 Ninevehs. So people are saying, Nineveh, Jonah. Jesus said the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, I think that's, I personally think that that's stretching it. But I have people sending emails. I had a dream that this is it. I had a dream. And of course, we had the eclipse back in 2017 that came from west to east, from northwest to southeast. This one is entering in Texas Hill Country from southwest to northeast. And they make an X and they cross in the middle of the country. And I believe the city near there is Cairo, Illinois. So everybody's, oh, this is so significant. And the answer is, I don't think we know yet. And we'll know after. I sent somebody an email yesterday. I said, maybe it is. I don't know. I really don't. It may not be. And everybody then says, well, you teach on Bible prophecy. You don't understand what you're talking about then. And as I said, I have baskets of all these little different ideas, and I sort of put the evidence that piles up against, or for each one. America is Babylon, Rome is Babylon, Mecca is Babylon, Jerusalem is Babylon. That's what some people teach, the final Babylon. And we'll know when it happens. We'll be able to figure it out. But I don't think that individuals right now should be making pronouncements that this is the way the Bible prophecy is going to be fulfilled. Because there are a lot of people saying that back in September of 2017, and I don't think, and I'll get emails from people, oh, there was significance happen, you just don't understand. Okay, I don't understand. I know what happened. I know all the positions of the sun, moon, and stars on that date. I've seen all the documentation on that. So we'll see. I have friends, very good friends, who think that King Charles is the Antichrist. Now, you might remember, I actually was on her show once. She actually called me, Constance Cumby. Do you remember her? And she had a radio show up in Detroit. She was an attorney, and she called the office, and she goes, I'm looking for so-and-so, but who are you? And I said, well, who are you? She goes, well, I'm Constance Cumby. And I said, oh, I know who you are. So we talked for a while, and she goes, I want to interview on my radio program tomorrow. So I was on a radio program, but she had a view that the Antichrist was Javier Solana, who was the foreign minister of the EU. And I think he's still alive, but he's like 98 now. And so you sort of have this logistics issue, like the Pope is in his late 80s. He's already lost part of a lung. Is he going to make it 7 years? That's the question. You know, is he going to be alive that long? And I don't know. I mean, Solana seems to be hanging in there. And King Charles, you know, he's off canceling his engagements now because he has cancer. They haven't disclosed what kind of cancer. And then I just happened to run across, I was at the grocery store, and of course, that's the only time I will confess to looking at the National Enquirer, and there was the headline on the front page was, he has pancreatic cancer and 6 weeks to live. So as a joke, I sent that to one of my friends who thinks that King Charles is the Antichrist. And I said, you know, I saw the movie Men in Black, you know, with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, and they said the National Enquirer was an authoritative source. And it was a joke. I guess you're not supposed to joke about those things. So here we get back to Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw it in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, I'll be honest with you, that's difficult to understand and interpret correctly. And there are all sorts of different theories. I think it's one of these ones where I think it'll be really apparent to a lot of people when it's actually done. I just don't think we're there yet, but I think we're close. And in verse 5, and suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So it's clear that that little horn is the Antichrist. But then the question becomes, where are these 10 horns from? Is it Club of Rome and there are 10 regions in the world? Is it 10 nations in Europe? That's a very popular interpretation, that the final beast will be 10 European nations, because that was the area of the Roman Empire. But that wasn't the only area of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire extended very far to the east. In fact, the eastern part of the Roman Empire outlasted the western part of the Roman Empire by 1,000 years, until it was taken over by the Ottoman Turks. So do you consider that it could be east of Rome? It could be something like Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Iraq, the area of ancient Assyria. And the answer is, I have my little baskets for each one of those. But if you go against somebody and their opinion that they have, boy, you're going to get in trouble. And one that I'm seeing more is that these 10 kings are the 10 nations identified in Psalm 83 and that are entering into these Abraham Accords. But there's a problem. Some of those areas right now are really, really against Israel, like the area of Tyre and Sidon. That's what? Lebanon. That's southern Lebanon. So the question becomes, is that area going to come into this 10-nation enterprise? And the answer is, well, if Israel has a war with Lebanon and defeats Hezbollah, maybe that will happen. So it's something you should be paying attention to. Now, the other one, though, is the bear raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth, arise, devour much flesh. And some people think that that's Russia. And we do see that Russia is engaged in a pretty bloody war. They've lost a lot of people. They've killed a lot of Ukrainians. I got a text from a Ukrainian pastor friend that I'm in regular communication with, and he sent me a picture of a young mother and her child who were killed in a Russian airstrike on Odessa, which is on the west side, west of the red area. And Russia has taken over, you can see what they've taken over of Ukraine, the red area. I saw John Mersheimer, history, geopolitical expert, no fan of Israel, by the way, from the University of Chicago, an interview this week, and he said, well, Russia will eventually take over 40% of Ukraine, and Ukraine is going to be left as a rump state with not much influence. Russia just wants to take it over, make a point. They don't even really want the resources of Ukraine. In Ukraine, this is one of the most fertile agricultural regions on the planet. I mean, they have topsoil that's phenomenal. Hitler was taking the topsoil from Ukraine and exporting it to Germany. So there's a lot of things going on. Navalny, who is was a rival to Putin. There are elections this year, has been in prison. His prison sentence was extended, and then he died. The question was he poisoned? Did he get the death punch from somebody from what used to be the KGB? Now the Russians are saying, no, it was Ukraine that killed him, so they could blame Russia. So Ukraine has enough power that they're able to go to a prison in the Arctic Circle and kill Putin's rival, because it's going to make Putin look bad. Listen, there's so much propaganda out there, it's really hard to tell what the truth is. So early this week, European leaders met in Paris to discuss the Ukraine issue. Now, when this happens, everybody who thinks that the European Union, 10-nation, final beast empire, I get emails, messages. I'm like, okay, it's a fact that I'm considering, and they're talking about this. But I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think Putin is scared of Europe at all. Their militaries are not that strong. What was it? The UK had some test firings of ballistic missiles from submarines, and they failed nuclear tests. And the answer is anything in the West going to work when it has to be done, when it has to be used? So the European leaders are saying, we've got to get together on Ukraine. So everybody says, well, look, they're coming together. They're concerned. President Emmanuel Macron of France on Monday said nothing should be ruled out after he was asked about the possibility of sending Western troops to Ukraine in support of the embattled nation's war against Russia. Mr. Macron, speaking after a meeting of European leaders in Paris to bolster support for Ukraine, stressed that the talks had not resulted in any consensus on putting troops on the ground in an official, proved and endorsed way. Excuse me. Sorry, I missed my mute button there. But he insisted that anything is possible if it is useful to reach our goal, which he said was to ensure that Russia cannot win this war. Now, when he said that, immediately all of the European leaders came out and they're saying, oh, wait a minute, Berlin, Germany comes out and says he has no authority to say that. He's on his own. It's a one-off. He shouldn't be saying that. Times of the UK were talking about Macron's warmongering makes battle inevitable. That was an opinion piece. Le Monde, the French newspaper, said the Ukraine's allies are divided over potential ground intervention raised by Macron. So he insists that this is the case. So this is the fact. So there were a lot of, and what this strife in Ukraine and the Middle East is causing other nations to look at their military and increase their military spending. Europe is increasing their military spending. Are they going to increase it by quickly enough to be this final beast empire at the end that's going to, govern global geopolitics? Now, they're trying on the control side, World Economic Forum, and they have a law that's very similar to what Canada enacted that will fine these big tech companies 6% of their annual revenue for a violation of the act. And what does that do? The tech company says, well, listen, I have to take this stuff down in Europe. I'm going to take it down in the United States. I'm not going to distinguish between the two. And what happens? Free speech gets beat up everywhere. In Russia this week, Putin gave his State of the Union speech. He does this every year. I think our president, I don't think I can bear to watch it, is supposed to give a State of the Union speech. And here is Putin meeting in Moscow the other day before the speech with Kadyrov, Ramzan Kadyrov, who is the head of the Chechen part of Russia. Remember, there was the terrible terrorist attack on a school in Grozny years ago, hundreds of children killed. His father was the head of the Chechen rebels at that time. And after his father died, he came to power, and now he's good buddies with Putin. And some people criticize him he's Muslim, on the Muslim side, saying, is he really a jihadist if he just gets along with somebody that we really technically hate? But he's very powerful in Chechnya, and Putin uses him, and he's been providing troops for the war in Ukraine, a lot of mercenaries and other things. And it's interesting, he was in Moscow to meet with Putin, but he was not seen in the crowd at the State of the Union speech. And everybody's wondering, okay, why is that? So you said this, that this town that they took over in Ukraine begins with the letter A, is another step towards victory. This is what Kadyrov said. I am confident that our forces in the Special Military Operations Zone will make rapid progress in the coming months. I think we will continue to move forward with big steps toward Kyiv. And so here was this big crowd that gathered to hear Putin do his speech, and everybody was there. You can see all the different kinds of ethnic groups, big hall. By the way, I hear these things all the time. Putin's ill, he's got cancer, he can barely function. And then he's doing these on-stage things where he's sitting there or standing there talking to people for 4 hours. This speech, you think I'm long-winded? This speech was about 2.5 hours. You can go to the Kremlin website and you can read the text of the speech. I'll share some of that with you. By the way, this guy was seen in, the guy that was in the first frame was seen, this is the 2018 State of the Union. So let's go back here to the beginning of this. So Putin speaks at his State of the Union. Let me pull up the text of his speech. So what he does is he goes back and he references his 2018 speech. So I went back and I dug into his 2018 speech, and I have played it. In the 2018 speech, what he does is he says, look, we're developing all of these weapon systems. First of all, he starts off, we were not the ones who started the war in the Donbass. That's in Ukraine. But as I've already said many times, we will do everything to put an end to it, eradicate Nazism, and fulfill all the objectives of the special military operation, as well as defend sovereignty, ensure that our people are safe. And that's part of the Russian military doctrine, is they want to protect ethnic Russians. So he said, listen, this is the Kinzhal missile that was unveiled in 2018. It's operational. It's been used in Ukraine. But so this shows how it breaks off. And look at where it's headed. That's headed to Florida. And Putin says, well, these people threaten us like we're going to attack them. But there he is at a State of the Nation back in 2018 saying, hey, I'm going to do this. And he also they have these other missiles, giant missiles. They also have this Poseidon missile that's nuclear powered that can go around the Earth with its little nuclear power plant. This is a cruise missile, and they showed this at the thing in 2018. So you can see they developed a lot of weapons, and a lot of these are somewhat operational now. Now, there are reports that Ukraine has shot some of these down. I don't know if that's true, but we really don't have effective defense to these hypersonic missiles because, as you can see, they can evade and turn, so they're pretty good. That's the theoretical part. So Putin goes on in his speech, and he says, Russia is ready for dialogue with the United States on issues of strategic stability. However, it is important to clarify that in this case, we're dealing with a state whose ruling circles are taking openly hostile actions towards us. So they seriously intend to discuss strategic security issues with us while simultaneously trying to inflict strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield, as they themselves say. And look, my opinion is Putin's as big a hypocrite as everybody else is. That just goes with politics. Here's a good example of their hypocrisy. They have recently made unfounded allegations, in particular against Russia, regarding plans to deploy nuclear weapons in space. Such fake narratives, and this story is unequivocally false, are designed to involve us in negotiations on their conditions, which will only benefit the United States. Therefore, there are reasons to suspect that the current U.S. administration's professed interest in discussing strategic stability with us is merely demagoguery. They simply want to show to their citizens in the world, especially in the lead up to the presidential election, that they continue to rule the world, that they would talk with the Russians when it will benefit them, and that there is nothing to talk about, and they will try to inflict defeat on us. Otherwise, business as usual, as they say. And he goes on, and this thing goes on for 2 hours. And I downloaded the text, in a Word document. It's like 30 pages long. So he's up there for 2.5 hours. But here's what so Macron says we're going to attack them. We're going to attack them. We're thinking about sending in troops. Then everybody in Europe comes in and says, we're not going to do that. But Putin said, listen, we need to shore up the forces in the Western Strategic Theater in order to counteract the threats posed by NATO's further eastward expansion, with Sweden and Finland joining the alliance. And Sweden did join this week. 200 years of neutrality changed this week. Sweden joined NATO. The West has provoked conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, and other regions around the world while consistently propagating falsehoods. Now they have the audacity to say that Russia harbors intentions of attacking Europe. Can you believe it? We all know that their claims are utterly baseless, and at the same time, they are selecting targets to strike on our territory and contemplating the most efficient means of destruction. talking about some of the weapon systems that Russia's had to face in Ukraine. Now they have taken the possibility of deploying NATO military contingents to Ukraine. What Putin does in this speech, and then he goes on to do this, he goes, listen, if you do this, I will start a nuclear war. And he may mean it, friends. That's the thing that you need to consider. He may actually do that if he feels threatened. I think people should take him seriously. There were leaked files this week to show that Russia's use of tactical nuclear weapons even extended at a time to China. And that's some of their military bases. That was from the Financial Times. And so what did they do? Whoops, let me go back. So what they did was they fired off a test of one of their big nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles. The day after his speech, after Europe says, we're not invading you, we're not sending troops into Ukraine, but he did this to send a message. Now, other people picked up on this, and there are people that, and I like the guy, but there's sometimes he's very much pro-Russia to a fault, I think, Douglas McGregor. And so he tweeted this. You see this February 28th. It says, Putin is moving nuclear weapons. It's not true. That was from a parade in 2022 that they were getting ready for. So it wasn't accurate what he shared. Now, he may be moving weapons elsewhere, but those aren't the ones. And see what it says here. On this video, Russian military start preparing for a parade of victory on May 9th, 2022. That happens every year. Also, Russia wants to move into Transnistria, which is part of Moldova. They have a lot of ethnic Russians, and supposedly they're going to vote this week, or may have voted, to say, hey, we want to be part of Russia. And this is Putin's doctrine of expansion, is I'm going to protect ethnic Russians. And that's interesting because if you go to the north of Israel, and I think it's Lieberman's party, is largely Russian immigrants to Israel. Because I remember I went to buy gas at a gas station, and the guy was a hot day, but he had on one of those Russian furry, the hats, and he was talking to me sort of English Hebrew with a Russian accent. It was, we eventually communicated, but that's a lot of ethnic Russians there. Is that going to be one of the hooks in the jaw to bring, if Russia is Magog, down in this Ezekiel 38:39? I don't know. That's the answer, is I don't know that yet. I'm just suggesting that maybe is a possibility a lot of people don't think about. Ursula von der Leyen, she published this tweet that says it's time for Europe to set up to defend our interests and values ourselves. So what Russia is complained about is the threat from Europe, and now Europe is responding to the threat from Russia by increasing its defense spending. And another article in the Financial Times, the Israel-Hamas war has bolstered German investor interest in weapons makers. Ukraine war transforms fortunes of European contractors. And then there was this article about, this is, Russia's doing this stuff in space. There's also at the UN this week, I won't take time to play it, you can find it on the UN multimedia site. Ambassador Dan at the UN from Israel spoke, and he says, listen, Russia, they're a problem. They're bringing Hamas and these Palestinian factions to Russia to talk about unifying them this week. Here's just a little bit of what he said in his speech.
Listen to this. This week, Russia will be hosting a Hamas delegation in Moscow, and not for the first time. Russia is one of the only places outside of the Middle East where Hamas terrorists and Houthi jihadists are given the red carpet treatment, even after October 7th. Russia is hosting those who are responsible for intentionally murdering babies, raping women, and burning families alive. But this meeting in Moscow is a result of something more broad, more dangerous. Russia is now deepening its ties with global forces of destabilization.
And so here was Lavrov, the Moscow, Russia foreign minister. And he's been around forever. I mean, I think he's been one of the ones who's survived throughout all the ups and downs of the comings and goings of various persons. Goings usually meaning they have a tendency to die in Russia. Putin's a dictator. He's probably the richest person in the world. And so Lavrov is saying, hey, we need to unite these countries. And what you see Putin doing and Lavrov is they're trying to shift the world focus from the West, United States and Europe, to the East to make it controlling. And Putin spent a lot of time in his speech talking about the development of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the countries that they're bringing in to try to get rid of the dollar as the U.S. as the world reserve currency, which will have a huge impact on the United States financial market. And listen, the commercial real estate market in the United States is in a mess. I talked to a banker yesterday. What the United States has been doing is they've been kicking the can down the road. They have a lending program. Banks have bonds. When interest rates go up, bonds go down. So these banks have bonds. The value of the bonds have gone down because the interest rates have gone up. But what the Fed did was says, we will create a special lending window for you where we will buy your bonds at face value. So if you had $100 million of bonds, they would lend you $100 million against that bonds with interest. And I asked my friend, I said, what's going to happen? Because that lending program runs out a week from tomorrow on the 11th. He said, well, at least right now, they will continue it, I think, just increase the interest rate, which means the banks have to pay more money, which puts pressure on them. I said, when are they going to stop kicking the can down the road? And he says, well, they're just about out of road. Because at some point, they have to get this commercial real estate drop in value priced into the market. I said, what does that mean? He said, you're going to see, I think, a lot of commercial real estate foreclosures coming up in the fall. And it's going to be unlike anything you've ever seen, if I understand the way things are going. So I know when COVID started, we started a real estate foreclosure group, receivers, attorneys who do foreclosures, realtors, receivers, REO, real estate owned asset managers for banks. And everybody thought there's going to be tons of work. There's been no work at all for 4 years. Zero. That's not normal with the way commercial real estate values have gone. So that's going to happen. So here's Lavrov in his speech. He says, listen, one of the pretexts for postponing and rescheduling these negotiations with the Palestinian factions is the lack of unity within Palestinian ranks. Skeptics have argued that it is impossible to negotiate when one does not know who speaks for the Palestinians. Jesus Christ was born in Palestine. So now he's a theologian. It wasn't even called Palestine then, by the way. One of the sayings is, a house divided itself will not stand. Christ is honored by both Muslims and Christians. I think that quote reflects the challenge of restoring Palestinian unity. One other area that seems to be significant in Bible prophecy is Sudan, and they're having a civil war there. It's been going on for a while. And when you see these countries, Kush, Ethiopia, that's Sudan, not Ethiopia. It's this area of Sudan today. Put is Libya and Algeria, and Dedan and Sheba is Saudi Arabia, Persia, of course, is Iran. These other, and there's a lot of dispute as to where these are, and that's what I talked about was this interpretive problem. And they always talk about where's Gog and Magog, and I found this map on Google as I was researching it, and it's the Korean Peninsula. And so I personally think Magog sort of extends across the upper part of Asia. And there you see the name Goguryeo with the Korean Peninsula. So this name Gog follows people around. And the Great Wall of China was referred to often historically as the ramparts of Magog, to keep out Magog from coming down. Now, in Russia, they say, no, we built it to keep the Chinese and the Mongols in. So everybody's got their opinion about everything. This report in the Wall Street Journal today is that Iran had tried to persuade Sudan to allow a naval base on the Red Sea coast. They were not successful in doing that. The Iranians said this is what the Sudan minister said. The Iranians said they wanted to use the base for intelligence gathering. They also wanted to station warships there. He said Khartoum, that's the capital of Sudan, turned down Iran's proposal to avoid alienating the U.S. and Israel. And there's trade chaos going on. Ships through the Suez Canal have dropped dramatically. That puts pressure financially on Egypt because Egypt relies in great part on the revenue that they get from the Suez Canal. And then there was the ship that was struck by the Houthis recently, and the ship sank this week. It kind of languished there. It dropped anchor, and now it's gone. The interesting thing, though, is that there are also some reports that undersea cables, there are undersea cables everywhere, have been damaged that are pretty important for the communications between Asia and Europe and Asia and the Middle East. That's not been confirmed. Some think that the anchor may have hit some undersea cables. They can be repaired, but it's costly and it will impact things. But there's also concern that the Houthis have figured out how to damage the undersea cables with some of the stuff that they've been given by the Iranians. And that's kind of interesting. So we had this situation in the United States this week where a U.S. Airman set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington. And I won't play the video. It's shocking to watch that he stood there as he's consumed by fire shouting, "Free Palestine." It was almost like he had to be on some kind of drug or something, or so motivated by a lie that it didn't matter to him. So what's social media doing? All the pro-Palestinian people, this man is the biggest hero. This one pro-Palestinian person on Twitter, I don't know why she pops up in my feed all the time. Maybe because I don't scroll past her right away. But she said, this is real America right here. This is the real America. These people are sick. They're insane. They believe lies. So now this week there was a stampede as they were handing out some aid in Gaza. There were some trucks. And you can see here in this video, this is a drone shot from the IDF. People gathering around the aid trucks. And of course, now everybody's saying that Israel shot and killed 112 people, but there were only a few that were shot. Israel's analyzed it and said, no, we didn't fire on them. And what happens with these aid trucks is people go and they get attacked by people from Hamas because Hamas wants the food. So there were 112 killed, is the last I heard. Of course, Ursula von der Leyen was deeply disturbed by what she saw. And of course, this is even the Wall Street Journal. Israel forces fire on civilians. This is what happens. Hamas says, hey, Israel fired on the people, and all the media goes along like little sycophants and say, yeah, Israel fired on these people. You remember back in the early days, I think this was the second or third day after October 7, there were reports all over the media. CNN had it, 500 killed in Israeli strike on Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. Now, I went through the videos and the photographs afterwards and showed that there was something that hit a parking lot. It appeared that it was a Hamas rocket that fell short, which about 30% of them do. They kill a lot of people with their own rockets, people in Gaza. So here's a map from the New York Times. Okay, so here's a report. Strike on Gaza hospital kills more than 500. Al-Shifa hospital. The hospital was destroyed, they say. So here's the map today. What do you see up there? Al-Shifa hospital. It's still there. Investigation shows that there were a few people injured. I'm not sure that anyone was killed, but what happened? Hamas said 500 killed. Everybody believed it, and now Israel's got to catch up with the narrative. And so now what the U.S. is doing is the U.S. is dropping aid packages of meals ready to eat into Gaza. Jordan's been doing it a little bit, but I've seen them open them up, and these are survivalist food, the stuff that will keep for 25 years. Thousands of packages of them. Well, what if Hamas gets their hand on them? Hamas has food storage for a long time. So this is the United States dropping these things. I don't know that the people that are in charge cannot think clearly. Here's Amir Avivi on I-24 News from the IDSF, and this is what General Avivi had to say.
Well, for the last few weeks, I've been talking with the leadership of the IDF and the government saying Israel needs to take responsibility of the humanitarian aid. I mean, on one hand, we are saying that more than 60-70% of this aid is going to Hamas. We are assisting our enemies. And then we see Israeli civilians protesting and trying to stop this humanitarian aid. Following that, there is hunger inside Gaza, and now we have international intervention. We have other countries like the US or Jordan bringing humanitarian aid from the aid. This is not the way it should work. I mean, any army who goes in and takes over an area and control it at the first...
Like it or not, you're in charge of the people there.
Yeah, you're in charge, and you have to take responsibility. Now, this has a lot of advantages, because then you can get more intelligence. Then, really, the society will understand that Hamas is not governing Gaza anymore. This can bring us closer to releasing the hostages. But for some reason, Israel is not doing the right step towards really taking responsibility, at least for a certain period of time, of handling all the humanitarian aid.
Why is Israel not doing that extra step? Why is Israel not saying, yes, we're not interested in having a civil administration like we had before in 1993 and being the governor of Gaza, but at least for the time being, for the few coming months, there's no other choice, or any other choice is worse.
Anybody who understands anything about how wars are conducted supposed to understand that when you bring down the enemy's government and when you take over an area, at the beginning you have military control and you have to take responsibility. And for some reason, the leadership of the IDF is terrified from that idea, but they cannot go around it. Even if it's for, half a year, or whatever. I mean, you saw in the Second World War, when the Allies defeated the Nazis.
They controlled Germany for 50 years, 40 years.
And then 6 years in Japan. And they could not do the process of denazification without this control. You can only do it, you can only really go into the education system if you control the area. If you don't, you cannot really reach the goals that you put.
So if you want to follow the IDSF briefings Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, you can sign up at IDSF I think is the website. Just type in Israel Defense and Security Forum and sign up for their daily briefs. Very interesting stuff. They have great guests on. They limit themselves to 30 minutes each day, Monday through Thursday, so if you want to watch that. And then here is this: Hamas is calling for march on Jerusalem holy site as talks falter. Ramadan starts next Sunday, and that's always been a problem in the past. And so we have this situation with Judea and Samaria, often called the West Bank. And look, Israel cannot live with these Palestinian factions in control of those areas. It's just not going to work. If they had an election in those areas today, Hamas would win by all polling that's done. You can't have that. I don't know what the solution is. Lebanon is a problem. Here is Caroline Glick's article this morning: Democratic rhetoric takes a perilous turn for the Jews. James Carville came out this week in an interview and said, if Biden loses, it's Netanyahu's fault. Yep, that's what Carville said. Always blame the Jews, man. That's what you should do, is blame the Jews, right? It's really, that's why I titled this All Nations Gathered Against. That's the title of today's update. This is what we're seeing everywhere on so many levels. You see Russia bringing the Palestinian factions in to get them to unite. Do you think that's in Israel's benefit, for Israel's benefit? Oh, they'll tell you that it is, but it's not. Go back to 1964. Who created the Palestinian Liberation Organization? KGB. Historical fact. And now our government's getting involved and saying, remember, Pompeo came out, said that the settlements in Judea and Samaria, where Jews live in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, I have a problem with this, because that green area is the biblical heartland of the Bible, the Old Testament. Shiloh, Shem, Hebron, Jerusalem's in that area. And you go to Jerusalem and maybe Bethlehem, but you don't go to the other places. And I interviewed, I'll put it up later this week, I went up and met with Jonathan Feldstein in Ann Arbor the other day from Genesis 12:3 and did an interview. I just haven't had time to put it up yet. And he said, I don't go to those areas because it's not safe. That's the biblical heartland. That's a scandal in my view. And most Christian tours do not go there. You kind of circle that green area. And hopefully someday that will change. Right now it's probably not safe. So Caroline, she has that. And then here's Anthony Blinken talking about the Pompeo doctrine, overturning it about a week ago.
They were disappointed in the announcement. It's been long-standing U.S. policy under Republican and Democratic administrations.
Okay, I'm not sure what it is. Well, anyway, he says, listen, we're going to overturn the Pompeo doctrine. Let's see if this one works. And David Friedman, the ambassador to the U.S. under the Trump, or Israel under the Trump administration, said Blinken is wrong. Great article by Israel Madad. He's on the prophecy program. I don't know if it's Prophecy Today. Jimmy DeYoung's ministry. Jimmy DeYoung passed away a couple of years ago, but his sons are still running it. And he has a great article going through the details. And I think Israel Madad is a lawyer, and he understands these issues from international law. And he says this is nonsense from the Biden administration. It should not be followed. And then there was this article in JNS that David Friedman talked about the future of Judea and Samaria. And he unveils a sovereignty plan. Go to jns.org, look up David Friedman, and read this article. It's very, very well done. Friedman is a superb lawyer. Never was against him, but against some of the people in his firm on some matters. and all great lawyers, really smart people, and David Friedman is at the top of that. And then here's an article. I'll close with this. This is Jonathan Spires' article in Friday's Jerusalem Post, Tactics and Strategy on the Northern Front. He talks about the fact that, look, something's going to have to be done in the Northern Front. There were some attacks. Here's a guy, a terrorist, driving in southern Lebanon. He was attacked. There were attacks by Israel up around Damascus. And then there were actually attacks in Syria, way up north of, like halfway between the Lebanon border and the Turkish border. There were attacks this week. There are also attacks in a place called Baalbek, which is in the Bekaa Valley. You see Mount Hermon there. That's northern Israel. And if you go up, you see that valley. That's sort of the green and area. That's where Baalbek is. That's a hotbed of Hezbollah activity. And I would highly recommend, go listen to Jonathan Spires' interview that Simon Barrett and I did on Friday morning. Spire is encyclopedic in his knowledge. He's spent a lot of time going in and out of Syria. He wrote a book about the Syrian civil war. He understands that. He's been in Gaza. He's been up north. He knows the area. He knows the people. And he just said, listen, Israel's going to have to do something with Hezbollah. They can't have 80,000 to 100,000 people not living in their homes in northern Israel. It's just not economically sustainable. Economic report came out, and the Israel economy contracted about 20%. So now they're having to adjust their budget, raise taxes to pay for the war. It's a big problem. Tourism is down. Hardly anybody's going on tours right now. It's a big problem. And this is what I think everybody's trying to put economic pressure on Israel in any number of ways, including the United States. And Genesis 12:3 says, I'll bless them who bless you and curse them who curse you. And I think it's very dangerous for us in this environment when the world, a large portion of the world wants to get us off our pedestal as the world reserve currency. I think it's very dangerous to be messing around with this. But they shouldn't be messing around with this either, and that's a problem. So we'll see how all this goes. Again, I will be doing an interview this week I have Tom Hughes on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern in the United States. And then on Wednesday, and I think that's at 1 p.m., I'd have to check, Mike Spalding and I will be talking with Carl Tekrib about world religions. Carl has a great book out called Game of Gods, and we'll be talking about that on Wednesday. So I appreciate you all listening. Like, share, subscribe, and that sort of thing. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Lord, thank you for giving us guidance as to the things that would be happening in our day. Lord, pray that you'll give us wisdom to understand, but to also use the speed of these events as motivation to share the gospel with people around us and to help them to understand, using Bible prophecy, that their decision as to whether to accept your free offer of salvation by grace through faith is a decision that needs to be made now. Now is the day of salvation. Pray you'll help us always keep that in mind. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.